Did you know in the higher dimension of 𝔹𝕤𝕗, Yahushua has a constitution, legal legislation, divine laws, as governed by his words? Did you know that? This is serious business, guys. I mean, look here. Look here in chapter 12 of Deuteronomy, divine laws. Moses says in the first section here, let's talk about the divine laws and instructions that you must obey as long as you live. This is really exciting because Moses is going straight into it at the very same time, give or take a couple of weeks, that Yahushua's bride is being told about divine laws. Now, I must admit that when I first read the article on Facebook about divine laws, I had a bit of a reaction. I didn't really like the term because it sounded serious. It sounded heavy, divine laws. And I've always tried to stay away from the word law because of the arguments that people have. Christians and Judaism, and is the law done away with? Is the law here? Where is the law? What book is the law in? Is it the first 5 books? Is it all the scripture? Is it this? Is it that? Is it nailed to the cross? Is it all this BS that religion goes on with? It's just easy not to use the word law. And that's why the scriptures say the word instruction. But when I put off my opinion and my feeling and went into it, I realized that when you only talk about instruction as an intimate, loving guide instruction from a father to a son or daughter, you run the risk of not seeing how serious they really are. They are legal legislation, divine laws. They are commandments, not suggestions. So let's look at this. And of course, you've got the picture there. It's serious business. This is the new Jerusalem that's going to come down from the higher dimension onto a restored earth after the fire and everything. This kingdom, this authority, this reign has laws. It's got a constitution, and you've got to do them. Just like you do in this society. If you don't do the laws, if you break the law, you go to jail. If you break the law, you get expelled, deported, get lost, if you're not from here. So same with Yahushua's kingdom. If you break the laws, cut you off. So let's look at this. Moses says, let's talk about the divine laws and instructions that you must obey as long as you live. I pretty much just said this. While the BR scriptures prefers the term instructions over words like commands, Torah, or law because of religious arguments surrounding the idea of law, and because instruction implies a lot more personal intimacy, we're going to look at the divine laws given today from the perspective of reigning government. We don't look at the commandments, the instructions in this light, do we? They're more of a personal instruction. We've got a choice, do them, don't do them. But no, this is reigning government. So we're going to look at these instructions from the perspective of reigning government and the higher constitution that every creature in 𝔹𝕤𝕗, the higher dimension, lives by. And those that didn't were booted out. Every creature in 𝔹𝕤𝕗 in the higher dimension lives by this constitution. The same behavioural laws of cleanliness given to mankind to live by if they want to come close to the Creator. You've got to work your deliverance. You've got to be obedient if you want to make it to the wedding feast. Yeah? So in essence, if you don't do this instruction, you don't live by this constitution, these divine laws, you won't make it. You won't be delivered. I believe that. So, we're talking about divine laws, the higher dimensional constitution. Let's have a look at this. Divine, what does divine mean? Sovereign. Look at this today in the 21st century. Yahushua in your life. Sovereign, controller, master, owner. Does he own you? A command, collectively the law, ordinance, precept, a verdict pronounced judicially, especially a sentence or formal decree. Divine law, individual or collective, including the act, the place, the suit, the crime, and the penalty. Scripture's full of all that, isn't it? The whole story. The place, the act, the suit, the crime, the penalty, abstractly justice, including a participant's right or privilege, adversary, ceremony, charge, crime, custom, determination, discretion, disposing, due, fashion, form, to be judged, judgment, manner, measure, order, ordinance, right, sentence, to abstain. That's interesting. If you come into this constitution, higher constitution, divine law, you might have to abstain from certain things, from food and drink, from impurity, and even from divine worship, apostatize. Specifically, to set apart to sacred purposes, devote, consecrate, separate, to learn by experience, diligently observe, a puff, wind, angry or vital breath, divine inspiration and intellect. Interesting. Take all that in and see how, this is why I didn't want to look at it, because I'd rather just see that the instructions are light, fluffy, airy-fairy, do them, don't. No, that's not how Yahushua feels about them. These are divine decrees, royal decrees, divine laws, yeah? So before we go into the scripture, I just want to give you a bit of a backstory. Let's go back in time to how ancient Israel saw these instructions, these divine laws, the constitution they were about to be given. They'd kind of been given them, or they had been, not kind of, they'd been given them at Sinai, but over the course of 40 years, they kind of got muddled up a little bit, not the instructions, the laws, but the people. They're wandering around for 40 years, a new generation had taken over. So that's why Moses is getting up before his death saying, things are going to shift a little bit, the behavior, the instructions haven't changed, but the behavior, the way you're going to implement these instructions has to shift a little bit, because you're going into a land and you're not going to be wandering around anymore. So let's go into it. The calamity and constitution. This was fascinating, guys. Our westernized constitutions were based on an idea, or better, an ideal of self-governance, and self-responsibility. While the idea of democracy was revolutionary to some degree, various elements of it were previously attempted by ancient Rome in having a governmental body called the Senate that theoretically represented the people. Other elements of our constitutions were modelled after the famous Magna Carta of the 13th century, which limited the power of the king such that he was supposed to obey established laws of the kingdom, just as the common citizens had to as well. So our constitution was really but another, though significant, step towards an ideal of democratic self-rule. Not a complete departure from everything that had been thought of or attempted. Yet, as radical as our constitutions seem to be, it cannot begin to describe the unprecedented detour taken by the covenant of Mount Sinai from all that had been known up to this point in history. So this is what I want to jump into, guys, to let you see just how revolutionary what Moses did when he got up at Sinai, or what Yahushua did by establishing the 10 instructions, the 10 commandments, the marriage vows, and how significant they were by looking at what it was like before that. So nothing our constitution seemed to be can begin to describe the unprecedented detour taken by to this point in history, particularly as it pertains to social justice, because up to this point there was only one source of law and justice for any of the earth's societies, and that is the law and justice as declared by the king. All law and justice constitutions came from the king of whatever nation you were part of. The concept first introduced to the Israelites out in the wilderness, that their Elohim, not a human king, their Elohim would issue this amazing system of laws and ordinances and rituals by which even the ultimate ruler of the government was to obey, boggled the ancient mind. What boggled the ancient mind? The idea that Yahushua, not a king, would issue this system of laws, ordinances and rituals. And even the highest rulers of the government had to obey them because they were given by Yahushua. This boggled the ancient mind. This was never done. Legislation was given by the king, not by any of the deities. And as happens in such cases, wait, where's my mouse? It's too small. There it is. Let's try that again. And as happens in such cases of radical departure from the norm, It often doesn't even feel real most of the time to most people. It seems rather like a fantasy or something that is far from their grasp, such as a dream or a vision, and so it's hard to put into practice. It is also rather easy to misinterpret what was meant because there was so little about many of these new concepts that a Yisraelite could relate to. Often it was simply easier to mix in a few elements of the law given to Moses with the ways and customs they had always practiced, or perhaps to look at what other cultures that surrounded them did and modify things a bit too. So I mean, we can look at the golden calf incident and go, oh, what's stupid? How, as if we know Ƴehoshua hates idolatry, All they would do, but the thing is, they weren't worshipping a golden calf, they were worshipping Ƴehoshua. You know, they were calling out on the name, celebrating the name of Ƴehoshua, but their behaviour was the same behaviour that they'd come from before. That's how they worshipped their deities from before. So in essence, they weren't doing anything wrong in a sense. They didn't know what they were doing, as infuriating as it was to Ƴehoshua, because they didn't get the point. The thing is, they weren't going out of their way to be disobedient. They were just mixing what they'd always done with Ƴehoshua. They weren't awakened yet. They didn't know what they were doing. Are we any different when we first come into Ƴehoshua? What do? Do we just abandon all paganism? Do we abandon the world? Do we abandon everything? Or do we mix that up a bit at the beginning? We're going to go into that later. Up to the time of Moses, as with most religions today, people were in constant search for what their various deities demanded of them, since they believed that most things that happened to them were the consequences of decisions by one deity or another. The people desperately wanted to know which deity had intervened in their life and why they chose to do what they did. And was there any way to appease or manipulate that deity? But universally, it was all for nothing, because it was just commonly understood that the deities and their desires were generally unknowable. The deities and their desires were generally unknowable. Serendipity ruled. The whims of the deity controlled everyone and everything. There was little to no logic for what these deities decided, whereas a typical earthly monarch's motives were usually self-centered. So life was always uneasy, because hanging over your head was the knowledge that some deity or another could disrupt your existence at any instant. And you might never know why or what you had done to bring that deity's wrath upon you. It was a truly terrible predicament, especially since, as we know now, none of them ever existed. They weren't real. This was all based on fairy tale, weather, fables and superstition. Of course, there were unclean spirits mixing things up and taunting people as well, pestering people. But it's not that the deities changed their mind, or the deities were cruel, or the deities were this or that. Deities don't exist. So this is all their own madness, idolatrous madness that they were raised in. Generation before were raised in, generation before that were raised in, ever since Babel and even before that. So you see, just as it is today, these deities aren't real. But the devastating thing is, they were unknowable. People were in a constant confusion. And I want to skim through a bit of a poem here to give you an idea. This ancient poem dates back to around the time of Abraham, from roughly 2000 BC, and poignantly expressed the common plight of the human race across all cultural boundaries and eras, and captures the dilemma that the whole known world lived in, and much of it still does, who did not know the one true living Elohim. So this is the state of the world even today. This 4,000-year-old poem is called The Prayer to Every God. And I'm going to really super skim through this, because I don't want to waste much time on it, but I just want you to get the idea of how hopeless their life truly was in this idolatrous system. May the fury of my Lord's heart be quietened towards me. May the God who is not known be quieted towards me. May the goddess who is not known be quieted towards me. May the God who I do or do not know be quieted towards me. May the goddess who I do or do not know be quieted towards me. May the heart of my God be quieted towards me. May the heart of my goddess be quieted towards me. May the God and goddess be quieted towards me. May God who has become angry with me be quieted towards me. Goddess who has become angry with me be quieted towards me. In ignorance I have eaten that forbidden by my God. In ignorance I have set foot on that prohibited by my goddess. O Lord, my transgressions are many. Great are my sins, O God, my transgressions are many. Great are my sins, my goddess. Transgressions are many, great sins. Oh, transgressions are many, great are my sins, O goddess, who I do or do not know. My transgressions are many. The transgressions that I've committed, indeed I do not know. The sin I've done, indeed I do not know. The forbidden thing that I've done, the prohibited place on which I've set my foot, indeed I do not know. The Lord in anger of his heart looked at me. The God in the rage of his heart confronted me. When the goddess was angry with me, she made me become ill. The God whom I know or do not know has oppressed me. The goddess who I know or do not know has placed suffering upon me. Although I am constantly looking for help, no one takes me by the hand. Though I'm constantly looking for help, no one takes me by the hand. When I weep, they, the gods and goddesses, do not come to my side. I utter laments, but no one hears me. I'm troubled, I'm overwhelmed, cannot see. My God, merciful one, I address you by prayers ever inclined to me. I kiss the feet of my goddess, I crawl before you. Oh, how long, how long, oh my goddess, whom I know or do not know, before your hostile heart will be quieted. Man is dumb. Man is dumb. He knows nothing. Mankind, everyone that exists, what does he know? Whether he is committing sin or doing good. He does not even know. Oh my Lord, do not cast your servant down. He is plunged into the waters of a swamp. Take him by the hand. The sin that I've done, turn into goodness. Turn into goodness. The transgressions that I've committed, let the wind carry me away. My many misdeeds stripped off like a garment. Oh my God, my transgressions are 7 times 7. Remove my transgressions, I'll sing your praises. May your heart, like the heart of a real mother, be quietened towards me. Like a real mother and a real father may be quietened towards me. See here, man is dumb. Mankind knows they're dumb. They put on a big show and song and dance and know how wonderful and wise we are. But when we lay our heads on the pillow, we know we don't have anything together. And yet mankind is programmed from birth to worship a higher power. So if we've been hidden, the higher power's been hidden from us, as in most of our lives, until we've been woken up, we worship something else. And look at this guy. Look at the author of this poem, how hopeless it is. Isn't this both heartbreaking and depressing? It expresses the utterly hopeless condition of mankind and the pathetic condition of the world's religious systems, past and present, to do anything positive about it. But it was this condition that the Hebrews, as well as everyone else on the planet Earth, are born into. It expresses how all humanity looks at spirituality in general and how their lives were but as worthless pawns for their deities. So now, that's the political climate we're coming into, the mindset of idolatry we're coming into. So now, in the middle of this, now, here comes along Moses with Yahushua, the old Elohim of their fathers, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And this Yahushua character throws the mother of all curveballs, telling them exactly who he is. What? They never knew who their deities were, or their desires, or their wills, or how to control them, appease them, please them, anger. They didn't know anything. They were known to the God who I do or do not know. The goddess I do or do not know. It was always, they don't know who they are. It was unattainable to know who your deity was. Then Yahushua comes along and tells them exactly who he is. No secrets. Tells them exactly who he is, precisely what he regards as good and evil, and what he expects of every man and woman who loves him, and even commits himself to operate within the bounds of his own unchanging justice system that he has established with Israel. The tabernacle, sacrificial system, atonement, all that. He's working with mankind in his own unchanging justice system that he has established with Israel. He's willing to do that, to be known. He wanted to be known, to be close. I want to be close with you guys, but I can't come too close because you'll frackle up, because you're unclean. So the cleaner you get, the closer you can come, you know? So isn't that amazing? And it shows just how, even though the deities weren't real and it was a false mindset, it shows how wicked Satan is and how tormented he wants mankind to be in. Crying out to a deity, to a god and goddess, crying out to mighty ones that don't exist, longing to be lifted up and no one answers them. And look at Yahushua. He comes along and tells them exactly who he is, carries them, loves them, stays in the wilderness with them as a fire and a cloud, so they know that he hasn't left them. Telling them exactly who he is, precisely what he says is good and evil, and what he expects of every man and woman, so there's no confusion. He says there is no other deity in existence to even consider. So therefore don't just add me to your collection of deities. There are no other deities in existence. So therefore don't bow down or fear something that doesn't even exist. And he tells them that he expects them to be obedient to him out of love and gratitude, not fear and paranoia. Yes, I know he uses the word fear in many places. It's not the same thing, is it? He wants them to be obedient because they want to. They want to know him. They want him in their camp. Love and gratitude, not fear and paranoia like that poem up there, that crackpot poem. Why? Because he loved mankind first, because he created us. He cares about the tiniest element of their lives and wants a personal relationship with each of them. Yahushua even says that these principles, divine laws he has given to Israel, form the foundation of the whole universe. They have always been, will always be, and that mankind can count on him staying the same from eternity past to eternity future. What about this? They're the building blocks of the creation, the foundation of the whole universe. His living words, we're going to come into that. Nothing could be further away from the hopelessness of all mankind as expressed in that ancient poem than what Yahushua offered to Israel. Complete opposite. Here, this is who I am. You can know me. There's no confusion. Do this, don't do this. Whether you like it or not, I'm letting you know who I am, and that's up to you. Yeah? You want to be in my reign? These are the laws. How does a society or even one lone individual transition from the kind of desperate thinking expressed within this poem and universally understood to be just the way things are, to comprehending the laws and the love of Yahushua practically overnight? You can't. No one can. We couldn't comprehend all this overnight. So Israel really didn't get it. It flew in the face of everything they knew. They could hear the words, but it didn't translate to understanding. Moses witnessed Israel at its best and at its worst over 4 decades. It must have been daunting and frustrating for this anointed leader, but before he died, he spent ages explaining the astounding, if not downright nearly unbelievable, blood covenant of relationship that the Creator of all things, the King over all kings and Master over all masters, had made with this ragtag group of misfits who had done nothing to merit it. That is what we are reading in Deuteronomy. This is the condition of the Hebrew thinking and beliefs that are trying to be overcome here. So this is why even when Yahushua came and revealed himself a little bit to Abraham, and particularly when Moses came along, this is why it was so phenomenal, because they seriously thought there were thousands of deities. And when you moved from territory to territory, you had to re-establish yourself with a different deity, because different deities were the territorial. So it's one thing to believe in Yahushua, it's another thing to believe that he's the only living Elohim. All the others don't exist. So get rid of all the idols, get rid of all the talking to other deities and bowing down and offering sacrifices. They don't exist. What do we see today in the world? It's the same thing. It may not be physical offerings, but how are people behaving in the self, you know? Israel is no longer going to be a cohesive group of people who live carefully arranged around a centralized sanctuary known as the wilderness tabernacle. So they're not going to be living around the tabernacle anymore. They're going to be spread out. Instead, As they cross the Jordan River and take possession of the Promised Land, they are going to be dispersed according to the tribe and clan over several thousand square miles of Canaan. With this rather drastic change in their daily living conditions, the logical and practical question that must be answered is, where do we worship and sacrifice? Where's the portal? Where's the portal going to be? The fire, the presence? What's happening? After all, if the instruction remained that only one place is permitted for worship and sacrifice, then by definition that place will be nearby for some tribes of Israel and far away, and a long journey for most of the others. So, see what I'm saying? If they're going to be scattered over hundreds of thousands of kilometres, then, where are we going to worship? We can't every time, let's go into it. So, let's hit the scriptures, guys. That's just a little bit of a background into their idolatrous mindset that I want to introduce, so that when Moses comes along and says this, we understand how they're thinking. And it's not too hard to imagine, because everybody's like that today. Moses says, let's talk about the divine laws and instructions that you must obey as long as you live. Don't forget that your ancestors worshipped Yahuwah, and now he's giving you this land of Canaan as your inheritance. But the nations that already live there worship other deities and false idols. So when you drive out the nations that live there, you must destroy all the places where they worship their deities, high on the mountains, up on the hills, and under every green tree. Break down their altars and smash their sacred pillars. Burn their Asherah poles. Cut down their carved idols. Completely erase the names of their fake-ass deities and destroy every place of worship so completely that no one will even remember they were ever there. Always lift up the name of Yahuwah your Elohim, and make sure you never worship him in the way those nations worship their deities. Does that make sense? We're going to go into some of these parts now, because Yahushua will not tolerate you worshipping like the nations do. And what's worship? Behavior. All shrines and altars and temples and places of worship of the Canaanite deities must be destroyed. Although it zooms by us in only 2 verses, there is a rather good description of the common characteristics of the places where the Canaanites worshipped. High mountains, hills, and under green trees. Then we see the kinds of items that marked those places of worship. Altars, standing stones, sacred poles, carved images of their deities. Wherever possible, an altar of sacrifice was located upon the highest local place, even if it was but a mound, because it was believed that the deities preferred to reside on mountaintops. But it was also common among the pagan religions to build an altar of sacrifice in a grove of evergreen trees, in a little circle. Or they would even plant a grove of trees around the altar. The reason was quite simple. Evergreen trees represented new life and fertility, and reproduction and sexuality were among the most common of all pagan sacrifices. So, you can dive into this a lot deeper. You can get a book called Fossilized Customs if you want to really know this inside and out. We're kind of going to skim through it. But burn their Asherah poles. What's an Asherah pole? Who was Asherah? It's not a what, it's a who. Who was Asherah? It's all to do with this sexuality and fertility rites. Baal and Asherah. A term we'll occasionally come across in scripture is Asherah, which refers to a wooden object used in worship of a consort of Baal, known by the name of Asherah. This deity is the queen of heaven and is called Artemis by the Ephesians in the book of Acts. The image of Asherah was a tree, a date palm, used by the pagan Canaanites and Sidonians. When northern Israel was dispersed into the nations by the Assyrians in 722 BC, they carried this tree custom with them. So it's spread over the whole world. In fact, the lost tribes of dispersed Israel have preserved one of their most cherished pagan customs among them, which is the Christmas tree. That's an Asherah. The King James Version translates the word translates the word Asherim into the English word groves. And around these Asherah tree groves, as part of their sacrifice, they would often place a carved pole. Simply envision a totem pole, a carved pole like a totem pole. The totem poles we are familiar with are a little more elaborate than what was typically carved in the ancient Middle East, but their purpose was essentially the same. They marked that particular place and the altar built there as a place to sacrifice to the specific deity represented in that carved pole. The standing stones spoken of are also sometimes called pillars, but in our modern way of thinking, the word pillar gives us the wrong impression. We tend to think of these marvellously tall, cylindrical, decorated stone pillars of a Roman building, but that's not what this was. A standing stone was literally a large, flat stone set upright and at times with wording chiseled on it. But often the stone had no markings. The stone generally was used in its natural state. A stone cutter did not shape it. Often it was a monument that simply says that something important took place at this spot. Other pagan religions saw the symbol of their deities in that stone, and it was an object of worship. They were also referred to as an image of jealousy by Yahusha. Also, and these obelisk steeples, pillars can be seen to this day all over the world. Obelisks, steeples, pillars, St. Peter's Cathedral, the Washington Monument, statues, pillars, steeples, phallus, penis, all that sort of stuff. It's everywhere. We've done episodes about that. There's just some pictures that relate to this subject. Again, I'm skimming through because we have a lot of writing today. Most of us have a firm understanding of this, but if you are new to Yahusha, like I said, go to Fossilized Customs. There's stacks of articles and books there you can read if you want to dive into the paganism and whether or not you are or are not living paganism in your everyday life. It's fascinating to go into. Now, the key to all this is grasping that anybody could build an altar or shrine to their deity anywhere, without divine authorization. The land of Canaan was absolutely peppered with altars and poles and sacred groves dedicated to various deities. Single families would build their own private altars. Towns would build communal altars. Kings would erect their own, more elaborate altars. And naturally, these altars would be constructed nearby for the sake of convenience of the worshipper. The Israelites were fully aware of all this because it was but standard practice in the entire known world at the time. And the reason that Yahusha, through Moses, is going through all this detail about altars and shrines is because the Hebrews would have naturally assumed, without giving it a second thought, that they were going to do the same thing as everyone else. They would have built altars and groves to Yahusha at multiple locations nearest to what would be their many settlements. That was the whole thing, mindset behind the golden calf as well. They were just doing what they knew to do. This is how we worship. This is how we behave. We'll just incorporate Yahusha into it. Not allowed. Didn't we all try and keep living and worshipping in our same familiar religious formats? Even after learning about the name of Yahusha. I did. Just to stand up there playing the guitar, just changed all the names to Yahusha. Instead of J-E-S-U-S, we changed all the names to, I think it was Yeshua at the time, and then it went to Yahusha. Still wanted to gather, still had the church mindset, still had to do something, this religious thing every week, Didn't we all try and keep living and worshipping in our same familiar religious formats, even after learning about the name of Yahusha? The worldly religious mindset is that one must gather. One must gather to worship in a building. You've got to worship in a building, a church, a temple. But what does Yahusha say about our bodies and the portal? How does he feel about us trying to behave religiously like the surrounding nations, even after he's awoken us? So can you see that we've been no different to Yisrael? It's just the behaviours have changed, It's not slaughtering animals and presenting things to our various different deities, but we still want to bring out all the behaviours of our religious hangovers and stay in them because they feel warm and comfortable and known. We don't want to step out into the unknown. We've been talking about that a lot the last year or so about the feasts. We have to gather with this religious mindset and do what the Messianic Sinatrims and, Jewish people have told us to do. You don't have to do any of that. You've got a portal. Communicate with your bridegroom. Therefore, Yisrael is instructed not to worship Yahushua in this manner. No groves, trees, totem poles, etc. Rather, Yahushua says that there will be a certain place of his choosing. There will be a certain place of his choosing where they will go to worship him, meaning the place where the tabernacle is to be erected and sacrificing is to occur. Nowhere else. They were only to worship at the tabernacle, nowhere else. And of course, their worship involved blood and guts and slaughter and animals and this and that. And they were to do it nowhere else, only the place where he chose. And only at this single central place are the 12 tribes of Israel to journey and bring their offerings, tithes and sacrificial animals. Our bodies are now the temple. So if there is to be nowhere else but the place where Yahushua says, the tabernacle, our bodies are now the temple, housing the portal of his esteem. And our obedient behavior is the offerings and living sacrifices that we offer up daily on the altar of our hearts. Nothing else. Nowhere else, no one else, nothing else. That's the only form of worship Yahushua accepts now, in spirit and in truth. The truth is, I've opened a portal, I've done something really sneaky. The divine real estate, set apart real estate, is now hidden, popping up all over the world in men and women's hearts. That's what the war's been all about. That's the only place I'm interested in. And of course, your worship is your behavior. Obey me. Moses continues, soon you will cross the Jordan River, and Yahuwah will help you conquer your enemies and let you live in peace there in the land he's given you. But after you are settled, life will be different and the patterns of behavior will need to change. Right now, all of you are doing whatever you want because you haven't arrived at the place of rest yet in the land that Yahuwah your Elohim is giving you as your special possession. So when you arrive there, you mustn't offer sacrifices just anywhere you want, because Yahuwah will choose a place somewhere in Yisrael for the dwelling place of his name. So he's moving on now from don't worship any other deities, smash down all their altars. Now he's coming into even when you offer sacrifices to me, you can't just do it willy-nilly anywhere you want, okay? You mustn't offer sacrifices just anywhere you want, because Yahuwah will choose a place. Yahuwah will choose the place. Somewhere in Israel for the dwelling place of his name. What's that? The dwelling place of his name. And you must go to worship him at the tabernacle there. Yes, all your sacrifices and offerings must be taken there, including sacrifices to please Yahuwah and any gift you promise or voluntarily give him. That's where you must also take 1/10 of your grain, wine and olive oil, as well as the firstborn of your cattle, sheep and goats. You and your family and servants will eat your gifts and sacrifices and celebrate there at the place of worship, because Yahuwah your Elohim has made you successful in everything you've done. And since Levites will not have any land of their own, you must ask some of them to come along and celebrate with you. We've dealt with the whole Levites issue. So let's deal with this. The only places of worship where Yahushua rests his name today are the living dwellings of his scattered bride. That is the only place of worship where Yahushua rests his name. It's the only place where Yahushua has rested his name, put his name in his chosen bride. So therefore, that is the only place where any kind of worship behavior can happen. Going anywhere else, doing anything else is nonsense. You're not understanding the portal. One of the things being legislated against in this instruction was also standard operating procedure for that era, which is the co-location of a place of worship and sacrifice of one deity with the place of worship and sacrifice to a different deity. What? We're dealing with the co-location of a place of worship and sacrifice of one deity with the place of worship and sacrifice to a different deity. An altar was not a place where one could bring a sacrifice and offer to just any deity. Every pagan altar and every high place was dedicated specifically to a certain named deity. But building an altar was hard work and time consuming. So as people moved in and out of areas and conquerors came and went and brought with them their own set of deities, and as a local deity's popularity would rise and fall, usually an existing altar or a high place was simply rededicated from one deity to the next one. And Yahushua says that Israel is never to do that for him. You will not offer your set-apart sacrifices on that second-hand BS old, altar that's had every Tom, Dick and Harry, on it. No way. You will only offer your sacrifices at the tabernacle, because that's been washed that's got remember on the day of dedication when the fire came, the higher dimensional fire mixed with the blood, Anyway, let's talk about this resting place of the name. It's an interesting way to put it, isn't it? The resting place of the name. Moses is about to order new forms that preserve those same timeless values that Yahushua gave to Israel on Mount Sinai. And the first order of business has to do with just where Yahushua's sacrifice will be located, and whether or not it is to remain as the sole place where sacrificing is to occur. Because they're about to go into the land. So we're going to be, your tribe might be living next door to the tabernacle, but we're going to be miles and miles and miles away. We can't be going over there every day, where are we going to worship? How's it going to work? So, and it is the place where Yahushua's name will dwell. Very important. Now this is an important concept to understand, because wherever his name dwells is where the interdimensional portal doorway will be, and where he is accessible. Accessibility is very important. Remember the poem we read? None of the deities were accessible. You couldn't access your deity. It was a confusion. You didn't know what was going on. You lived in devastation and turmoil and confusion. So wherever his name is where the portal is. And where the portal is where he's accessible. And it's also important because this drives home the point that Yahushua himself, meaning the sum of all that he will be. What? It drives home the point that Yahushua himself, meaning the sum of all that he is, will not be dwelling in the tabernacle. It's not the whole lot of him in the tabernacle. He never has, and he never will. The sum of all who Yahushua is dwells in 𝗓𝗏, the high dimension, not on earth. And he certainly does not restrict himself to some building made by men. This idea of his name dwelling there then deserves some discussion. For us modern Western culture folks, the meaning of For us modern Western culture folks, the meaning of a person's name is simply a means to identify that person from millions of other people. It's not much different than a street address or a social security number. But in Eastern culture, and particularly in scriptural times, a name had a much broader and more significant sense to it. In Hebrew, the word we translate as name is Shem, and it means reputation. And it denotes a set of attributes and characteristics of a person. So when Yahushua's name is established in a place, it means that his essence and nature is attached also. Yahushua, Yahusha. His name, it means that his essence and nature is attached to it as well, in that some or all of his unique attributes are present or represented there. Just like his spirit now living within his bride, the place where his name now rests and is written. It's not the totality of all that Yahushua is. Rather, it's just a small down payment or portion of his essence or attributes of him that dwells within the fleshly tents of his bride. But just as of old in the tabernacle and temple, upon the mercy seat of the ark, the location of where Yahushua rests his name is completely up to him. You can't go out there and force anybody to have his name upon them. You can't go out there and force Yahushua to put his name on anybody. The location of where Yahushua rests his name is completely up to him. If he tells you to open your mouth to somebody who is interested, open your mouth. If he tells you to shut up because they're mad and they're just trying to set you up, shut your mouth. If he tells you to live a quiet life and mind your business, majority of the time, you do that. Listen to his voice. I am Yahuwah, that is my name. So, very, very important that we understand this. And this is why, because I mean, there wasn't much written down back here. This is why the idea of words were important. Blaspheming a person's name, particularly Yahushua's, is like assault, going up and punching him in the face, because words meant something, particularly back here. Today, everybody says whatever they want, but back here, words meant something. And a person's name, attaching it to a place, a person, even a promise, a vow, very important. So Moses continues. Yahuwah has promised that later on, he will enlarge your borders and give Yisrael more land. And some of you may not be able to travel all the way from your homes to the dwelling place of his name, the tabernacle, each time you are hungry for meat. We're not going to go into that because we dealt with it back in Leviticus, the whole idea of you weren't just allowed to eat meat willy-nilly, you had to offer it first and give some to the priest and give some, sacrifice some, keep a portion of it, take the rest home for your family. So what they're saying is when they go to the promised land and they're miles and miles away from the tabernacle, what are we going to do? Every time we want meat, we've got to travel to the tabernacle and get, oh, what a pain in the ass. How's it going to work? And he's saying that in the future, Yahuwah will enlarge your borders, give Israel more land. Some of you will not be able to travel all the way to your home, from your homes to the dwelling place of his name each time you're hungry for meat. But Yahuwah will give you cattle, sheep and goats, and you can slaughter any of those animals at home and eat as much as you want. So he's making it easy. It is the same as eating the meat from a deer or a gazelle that you kill when you go hunting. So even some of the stricter instructions that he instituted in the beginning to get their attention, to train their minds out of Egyptian paganism, after 40 odd years, he's relaxing a little bit on some of them. So he's saying, that's okay, you can eat some meat without taking it, hauling it all the way to the tabernacle, day's journey, So he's transforming some of the instructions a little bit, not compromising the validity, but just, he's always making life easy for us, he's not a burden. His yoke is not heavy. So, and in this way, anyone who is clean or unclean can have some of the meat. But again, don't eat the blood, for it's the life of the animal. So let it drain out on the ground before you eat the meat. Do you want Yahuwah to make you successful? Do you want your children to be successful even after you are gone? Then do what pleases Yahuwah and don't eat any blood. All sacrifices and offerings to Yahuwah must be taken to the place where he chooses to rest his name. So the sacrifices and offerings still had to be taken to the tabernacle. If you just wanted to eat some meat, that's a different thing. All sacrifices and offerings had to be taken to the place where he chooses to rest his name. And if you offer a sacrifice to please Yahuwah, all of its meat must be burnt on the altar. You can eat the meat from certain kinds of sacrifices, but you must always pour out the blood, animal's blood, on the altar. Why the big emphasis on drinking blood? Notice here he ties it in. He says, do you want your children to be successful even after you're gone? Then don't worship idols. He doesn't say that, does he? Don't commit fornicate. No, he doesn't say that. No, he says don't drink blood. Of all the things you could tell the people to do to be successful and live a great, he tells them not to drink blood. Why the big emphasis on drinking blood? Let's look at two different types of life, two different types of existence that we can have, two different types of existence we can experience. One, these are both life. One, the base, living and breathing, eating and pooping, savage, carnal existence of self, day in, day out, procreating within an aging death trap of slavery, and relating within the species like any other mammal beast of the field. That's life. It's got the breath of life in it. Blood maintains the life of this existence. You can't live without blood. Technically, you can be alive without a brain. You can't be alive without blood. The essence of who you are, the essence of the Creator, is in the blood. And it's tied, we're going to talk about blood in a second, so I'll leave that. But that's this first type of life, this base animal beastly existence, like any other beast of the field, relies on blood. 2, what's the second type of life? A quickening, sobering, awakening by the breath, essence, ruach of Yahusha, that sparks true intimacy and love and connects a base human in the lower dimension to the throne of Yahusha's esteem in 𝚂𝕖𝕙𝕒𝕚, the high dimension where he is. Without this spark of life, man is but an animal. That's what we see around us, isn't it? Without this spark of life, man is but an animal. So blood maintains the first kind of life. What maintains this higher life? The tree of life maintains the life of this higher existence. You can't have this higher existence without access to the tree of life. Just like you can't have any life in the natural without blood. What on earth are you talking about? We're getting there. Because Moses is talking about blood, you see? Blood and life. Don't eat any of the blood. So, life is in the blood. The divine law of not eating blood went right back to the time of Adam and Ḥawā. The reason that the blood from secular slaughter is to be poured out on the ground and never consumed or used for any purpose is the scriptural principle that the life of any living creature is in the blood. Think of a powerful, all-healing, curing, soothing ointment, a balm or potion created only to spark life, sustain life, maintain health and purity. This is the reason, that's what blood is, this is the reason why only blood can be the acceptable price to atone for mankind's evil. Since life is in the blood, a common everyday Israelite has no business or divine authorization to use blood in any manner for anything. You are not qualified to go near blood. You can't touch blood, drink blood, anything blood. Don't go near blood, particularly if a dead animal. You're not allowed to deal with blood. It's a special commodity, set apart. So, since a priesthood had been established for the sacrificial system of atonement on behalf of the entire congregation of Israel, only members of a single tribe, Levites, could use the blood of for any purpose whatsoever. Only the Levites could use the blood for any purpose whatsoever. So the only choice of every other common Israelite was to return that life that is in the blood to the soil. In essence, returning it to Yahusha, where he butchers an animal for food. So blood is very, very set apart, special. It's like there's something in it, isn't there? And Yahusha's ears are connected to it. It's like the Matrix. You know, when Neo opens his eyes and he doesn't just see the world or the Matrix, he sees this green code. That he sees everything in code. Yahusha can hear and see the frequency of blood, of mankind's blood. I can hear your brother's blood calling out from the ground. He can see the frequency of mankind's blood. So what must he be going through now with the amount of death, bloodshed in the world? Some silly pictures there of idolatry. That's Asherah apparently. And the guy slaughtering a cow, a bull. So we dealt with the first aspect of life, which is blood. The first aspect of life, and blood maintains the life of this existence. Let's talk about the tree of life, which maintains the life of the higher quickening. The tree of life. Life is what Adam and Ḥawā were separated from when they disobeyed Yahusha and ate from the tree of understanding. Yahusha prohibited them from the eating of the fruit of the tree of life that grew in the garden. Why? Because if they did eat from that tree, they would continue to obtain eternal life, and their evil behaviour would become eternal too. And this is what Satan has always wanted, to make himself and his ways eternal and preeminent, to bring his influence, his ego and perversion into the higher dimension indefinitely, because he is so hatefully jealous of how magnificent, wonderful, pure and always right Yahushua is. He's so hatefully jealous. He's determined to prove that he isn't really kicked out, and that he's just as powerful as Yahushua. Adam and Ḥawwa were not redeemed, and disobedience was now residing in them. Yahushua first set up the principle of redemption, not with Moses and the priesthood, but with Adam and Ḥawwa. Eternal life is something Yahushua wants for all mankind, but it will always be restricted to those who are redeemed according to his definition and method of redemption. His definition. So just as Paul explained that the unworthy could not drink of the Passover cup, the idea ties back to the tree of life, because Yahushua is the tree of life. We've known that for a while now. Yahushua is the tree of life. The portal was closed, connection was lost, and intimacy was severed. The world was in darkness, and the only source of life was now guarded by a flaming sword, taken away back to the higher dimension. No source of life on planet Earth anymore after the garden. That is why it was such a huge deal whenever Yahushua appeared, maybe in a dream, for a meal, for a chat, maybe for a little bit of a rumble or a wrestle with Jacob. He appeared as the king of Shalem, Melchizedek. He appeared then in a burning bush, the cloud and the fire by night, until the day of dedication, when the tabernacle was ready for business to house the interdimensional portal and divine radiation and set apartness involved. The tree of life is the words of Yahushua. I didn't realize this until very recently. I thought it had to be him. He's the tree of life. But his words of life are the tree of life. Even if he's not physically manifest, the hearing, the listening, the taking of his words into our hearts and believing them as divine truth, standing and walking on them in all our conversations and dealings, brings his life into us. His words and behaviour, the tree of life, indeed brings such violent revolution within each of us, doesn't it? What have you been through since he's approached you with his words of life? So through his words, this is what was amazing to me. Even just hearing his words, receiving them, believing them and doing them, started to set you apart from the pack. You know, even in the times of Abraham, where there are multiple deities worshipped, he just heard one of them, he thought, and did what he said, passed the test and became a friend of Yahushua's. Became the father of the belief, Abraham. Everything Yahushua's still doing is because of the patriarchs. Remember the promise that I made with your patriarchs, with your fathers, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. So, Moses says, let's kick this point home. If you obey these divine laws and instructions, you will be doing what 𝗂𝕖𝕙𝕒𝕚 says is right and good. Now, doesn't that mean something when you remember the context of how darkened their minds were and they were so confused as to what they were meant to do? What does my deity want from me? If you obey these divine laws and instructions, you will be doing what 𝗂𝕖𝕙𝕒𝕚 says is right and good. No confusion. Then he will help you and your descendants be successful. And as you go into the land and attack the nations that are there, Yahuwah will get rid of them all before you and make their land available to you. We'll come back to that. He will make their land available to you. And that's when you must be careful, especially careful, not to get curious and ask, how did those nations worship their deities? How did they become successful? What are their systems? What was their philosophy for living? Their mindset and systems of worship? How did they used to do it? Shouldn't we follow them and worship Yahuwah in the same way? Hell no, you shouldn't. For Yahuwah hates the disgusting way those nations worship their deities, hates their behaviour, in other words. In fact, every behaviour that is an abomination to Yahuwah, the nations do as part of their idolatry. That's a statement, isn't it? Every behaviour that Yahusha hates, every behaviour that is an abomination to Yahuwah, the nations do as part of their idolatry. They even burn their sons and daughters in the fire as living sacrifices to their deities. So you, Yisrael, must obey all the divine laws and instructions that I'm giving you today. Don't add anything to them and don't take anything away either. Now, reading this from a 21st century perspective, I'm starting to realise, after so many episodes we've done, that when Yahusha says things like, I will get rid of all the, when you go into the land and attack the nations that are there, Yahuwah will get rid of them all before you and make their land. Well, how does that relate to me? I am trying to buy a house, but what does that mean to us today? The land. What is that? That's not as important to us today, is it? The land. We're not looking at the promised land. What is it? Conquering land in this ancient time equates to our success, our peace, favour and shalom, overall sense of peace and well-being and everything. That's what it means in 21st century, and how much we choose to exercise our belief in order to surrender and conquer more and more of our own body. The set-apart promised, that is the set-apart promised land, our vessels, overcoming our fleshly self, putting it under the ban and bringing it into submission of Yahusha's divine law. That is what conquering the promised land is. Yahusha will give over to you the promised land. Your enemies will fall at your feet. If you believe, if you are obedient, this will happen to us too. Whatever Yahusha's put in front of you, whatever carrot he's dangled before you to motivate you, to be wiser with money, to behave yourself better, to be more responsible, to be a wise steward, to look after what he's given you, all these things that he's, even just in a natural sense, the path that he's put you on in life will be successful if you do what he says to do. And then you've just got a picture of Moloch there. That's offering the babies to the deities. That was the main deity, Moloch. The prohibition of child sacrifice was not the purpose of these final verses of chapter 12. Rather, Moses takes the most extreme example of what can happen should Israel start to adopt ways of the pagan neighbours as they honour their false deities. The idea is that for a Hebrew to put sample or inquire about even the most mundane or seemingly harmless aspect of the Canaanite pagan lifestyle will, with some Hebrews, be irresistible and end up with their committing the worst possible atrocities. And they'll even do it in Yahusha's name. So they should shun these practices and behaviours with every fibre of their being, regardless of whether it insults, offends, angers, or merely makes relations with the Canaanites uneasy. Don't even be curious about the way the world does. Don't just stay away from it and listen to Yahusha. Well, that's the choice Yahusha lays out to Yisrael. Obey my divine laws and instructions, regardless of the social consequences, so that I can bless you, or commit idolatry by adopting some of the ways of the world and thus perverting the true worship of the one true Elohim, in order to blend in with your neighbours and have a form of peace. Of course, Yahusha has given his bride the 3 rules, which are a conflict resolution, allowing us to step out of any argument and wait for Yahusha to act in a given situation. That's what the 3 rules are for. Don't take anything personally. Just let everybody have it, and don't make excuses. Conflict resolution, stay out. Let them all rip each other apart. It's so much better watching Yahusha move, but we actually have to practice the rules to see it happen. Now let's finish by looking at Yahusha's divine law in today's 21st century culture. What is a culture? A culture is the way of life, especially the general customs and beliefs of a particular group of people, at a particular time. And that's why the scriptures are alive to us and make sense to us, because if you take out the cultural aspect and see that no matter what they were saying, living, dressing, eating back then, the behaviour is still the same today. The study of culture is a massive undertaking and enters many different avenues. Cultures are arising from humanity and are heralded and praised for their uniqueness by global societies. Cultures have derived over many thousands of years and have many similarities. Today there are a great variety of platforms for culture, and they're all fighting for recognition and support globally. All cultures have a man-made religious format which is not of Yahusha, but themselves. And this behaviour is wickedness, which is living against Yahusha's blood covenant instructions and is a completely different way of life. What have we been talking about with Moses? Don't do what the world says, all their religious madness. Don't worship how they worship. You come into the blood covenant and be obedient. Do what I say. The real cause of coronavirus is mankind living and behaving a culture that teaches us to worship spirits and deities, ignoring the true creator. Yahusha's instructions tell us that if we have such behaviour on the face of this earth, it brings a curse on ourselves as well as the land. Yes, both us and the land are convulsing in our respective behaviours. Corona is only the beginning, and everything is going to worsen from here until this universe folds in on itself and frackles up. It's high time we faced the fact that all religions and cultures are satanically derived. Have you faced that? And following these behaviours curses our lands and our people. There is no way the majority of these deceived men and women are wanting to stop this wicked behaviour, leaving others with no hope. No hope. And what did we talk about with that poem in the beginning? No hope, confusion, devastated, downtrodden. It's the same today. People don't want to leave their deception. They don't want to stop their wicked behaviour. Yahusha said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now we understand a lot more about the way, the truth, and definitely the life now, don't we? He is the only source of life. And we are so blessed that we have a Saviour who says, don't be afraid, for I will save you from this catastrophe. No matter what men or women say, Yahusha has plainly and simply proclaimed and pronounced his divine laws over this universe. It's now the opposite. Men and women are the ones trying to complicate it all, confuse it all. Yahusha has made it clear, plain and simple. Unlike all the other pagan deities who are unknowable, Yahusha is knowable. You can know Yahusha, his mind, his heart. You can draw close to him. He's made it plain and simple, proclaimed his divine laws over this universe. These laws are written in the first 5 books of Scripture and are followed up by the behaviour of Yahusha Messiah while he visited this earth. So all the books of Scripture demonstrate what this divine law and the effect it has on mankind. It's officially given in the first 5 books, and then all the other books are what mankind, obedient and disobedient, have done with it. Yahusha's initial presence was to establish the renewed covenant, blood covenant, and introduce divine law to those believing. Yahusha's victory on the stake, his healing ministry and raising from the dead destroyed the complete arsenal of Satan, taking from him ownership of this universe and power over mankind. Repenting of the old ways and being immersed will lead you into receiving Yahusha's set-apart spirit, who will circumcise your heart and open a portal where you may communicate with our deliverer. Living the divine laws cancels out the laws of men. Did you know that? Living the divine laws cancels out the laws of men because they are much higher and better. The majority of mankind today has no desire to change their ways, and divine law has consequences, both good and bad, which we see being displayed all around us every day. Whatever happens to you, are your own consequences because of your behavior on Yahushua's earth. If we ignore Yahushua, he will ignore us when we need him the most. Even though we are knocking on his door, he says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." How devastating would that be? Don't be deceived. Divine laws are a part of our lives. And how wonderful and exciting is it to be a part of the bride of Yahushua in these last days. That's what I find phenomenal. This article about divine law came up on Facebook and I thought it was bizarre. I'd never heard of that sort of, his instructions worded like that. Divine law. I mean, who calls it that? Plenty of people do apparently. Yahushua does too. Divine law. I didn't know about it. And then look what Moses is going into right here. This is why Yahushua's blowing my mind all the time. Doing Shabbat is following divine law. Not doing Shabbat is disobedience and brings a curse on you. Yahushua shed his blood to cleanse his followers. He conquered death so we can believe he will deliver us from Satan and sin. Don't be deceived. We are not to do any work on Shabbat. No buying or selling. It is a day of rest. No gardening or anything. This is divine law. So let's finish this up. It's been long enough, guys. What is the takeaway from all these diverse subjects we've discussed today? Yahushua's instructions are not merely intimate suggestions of love from a father to a child. No, they are the divine laws and legislation that make up the eternal constitution of his reign and form the fabric of all creation. So yes, they are intimate instructions given to us from our Father into us. They are intimate. They encourage and allow for intimacy. But take on the full weight of what they really are. We can understand a lot in our carnal minds, enlightened minds as well. No, they are the divine laws and legislation that make up the eternal constitution of his reign and form the fabric of all creation, the power of his living word. The tree of life, once hidden, is now accessible to his bride, the chosen dwelling place of his name. And she is to be set apart from all forms of worship, behavior of the outside nations. Yahushua refuses to be worshipped the way the pagans, fake deities are. For his bride has been washed in his own blood and claimed back from the enemy as set apart real estate. Hot property. That's a 𝗪𝗓𝒂 song, Hot Property. I'll play it in a moment. So with this understanding and intimate connection through the portal of life on her heart, why would any bride want to search out a physical building and other wacky people to try and connect with? For that's a bondage mindset that the world's religions hold over everyone, to close the door and make themselves the divine voice, the divine law on this planet. So take this bit here and relate it to the feast, not just a weekly gathering, but also for feasts. Why would any bride with an intimate connection through the portal of her heart want to seek out a building and other wacky people? Why would you want to? You've got everything you need within the... I mean, if there's people nearby and they're like-minded and a pleasure to be around, then great, but why would you want this whole assembling mindset of madness? That's a religious hangover. Did you consciously realize that you are this valuable with such a royal status? Your body is of the utmost importance to Yahushua. It is the only place on this planet where his name rests and where the dimensions connect. Just like the Garden of Eden, it's now inside us. The eternal war of good and evil that started in the garden with mankind, the tree and the dragon, is still raging for ownership over your body. That's what the war between the dimensions and the upper dimension, that's what the war is about. The hearts and minds of men and women. It's still raging for ownership over your body. The dragon knows the value of Yahushua's chosen real estate that houses the doorway to the tree of life. And he still seeks to claim it for his own. Will you continue to allow him access? Maybe he thinks if he can possess us enough, he can get back in there because he's been booted out. Maybe he thinks he can get back in there to the higher dimension because he's that deluded, he's that deceived. Maybe he can wage war again. Maybe he'll win next time. He's so mad, he thinks that probably. Will you continue to allow him access to your vessel? You're the chooser of the thoughts that you think in your heart. So that's enough, guys. It's been a long one today. Sorry, but so much writing. I was just flabbergasted by all the stuff I was finding about this subject. It's amazing. Keep going, brothers and sisters, and realize just how valuable you are to Yahushua. There's no more need for assemblies, churches, synagogues, mosques, any of that madness, assembling in a building. The assembling is in here. You are the living dwelling of Yahushua, offering up set apart sacrifices. I love you guys. See you next time. We're going into prophecy. Moses starts talking about prophecy, and last week an article on Facebook came about prophecy. So it's just phenomenal where we're going, guys. Can't wait. See you later.